Welcome, everyone, to Ladder Daily Digest. We honor creators, and today we're honoring Alex O'Connor and Jacob Hansen in a way, right? By reacting to the recent appearance of Jacob Hansen on Jubilee, where Alex O'Connor took on, we'll say, 23 Christians and 2 Mormons. How about that? Just so that any Christians watching will understand what we're talking about.
Yeah, you can all hit Gene with that. I've said that Mormons were Christians from the beginning. I still maintain it. And in spite of what Alex O'Connor, I think, is very cleverly trying to say.
And Joe is going to run the show basically as the Church of Korihor. And he's got some clips that he's going to show. And we're also welcoming into the show Sam Pinson. Sam, you want to say a little bit about yourself?
I'm here representing the average Joe.
There you go. The other average
I'm
Joe.
a nobody. I don't have a podcast or
I'll just say one thing.
I just have opinions.
If it wasn't for Sam's appearance on Mormon Stories podcast, I would just be coming to my senses right now. But because he and his family presented their cases so well, especially his son with the same name, did such a great job. I showed the video to my children, my sons, who were probably we'll say they were adults. I think they were adults. And my youngest had been planning on a mission, and after we saw it, I said, you know what? I had wanted you to go on a mission so that you could go learn a language or explore the world or grow up or whatever. But now I'm not sure. And he said, yeah, after watching, I'm not sure I want to do that. And so it was very informative and life-changing for at least our family, we'll say.
Very gratifying. Thank you.
And so I'll include a link to Sam's episode on Mormon Stories. And we are going to be joined by Maven pretty soon. She's getting some things in order. And Joe, go ahead and maybe describe what the event is that we're going to be watching, or what the event was, what for people that don't know.
Well, everybody's on fire about this in our sector of the internet, and it's about the Jubilee episode of 25 Christians versus 1 atheist. I'll say, as the only current, I think, I'll just speak for myself, the only current founder of a church for atheists on this panel, right? That my boy Alex, he did all right. I thought that, I've made some comments about the problematic side of Alex O'Connor in recent broadcasts, but I will say generally he's a very erudite, very sharp young man, very well educated in philosophy, very well educated in religion, and his atheism seems strong to me. So and he is very eloquent, and he did a great job in this episode. Honestly, I think he was actually quite good. By the way, I'm sending you a link to the Jacob Hansen. I'm putting it here in the chat in the studio. Okay. But yeah, so you talked to Jacob Hansen, who is definitely problematic. I'm very grateful that he was on my show. He was on Church for Atheists, one of my first guests, in fact, on Church for Atheists. He's become quite his problematic nature usually comes out on X, but occasionally it pokes through in his YouTube persona, including, I don't know if you saw this, but today I think it's today, he posted on X the letter he wrote to Julie Hanks, stake president. Did you see that?
That's really good that he's weighing in and like his opinion matters.
Oh yeah, right.
That was the piece of information that the Spirit couldn't convey to the stake president to get the right decision.
Right. He even includes in the link, he puts in there, this was forwarded to me by someone in the Church of Korihor who got included in one of his videos, and it's been quite traumatic for her. And now she's had to spend like all morning just blocking all the comments on her videos. Now people, his followers have found her YouTube channel and just started bombarding her with harassment. And it's like, my gosh, it's wild. So, I mean, I don't think that Jacob went out looking to create such a toxic audience, but boy, if he didn't find it, So, I mean, I'm not that you'd expect anything different, but oh man. So yeah, it's an interesting time.
I think given how toxic Jacob is on X especially, I think it's obvious that he would create that kind of a following. And I don't think he cares really the effect that he's having on Julie or his audience. I think he likes it.
Yeah, this is the effect he wants. Like if he can get people to harass somebody into silence or put them on the defensive, this is precisely what he wants.
Yeah. I agree.
Yeah, so so since this Jubilee video, which Jubilee, people don't know, is a big channel, millions and millions of followers. They post a video, it gets millions of views instantly, and
we're not randos.
That's right. I'll be a rando, but I have had Jacob Hansen on my show. Those of you who don't know, Jacob doesn't go on the shows of randos, but I just consider myself an exception.
Yeah.
I was grateful that he came on the show. I mean, he almost bailed, but I was grateful that he came on the show. But I do disagree with him on pretty much everything, and I do think he is toxic, and his audience much more toxic. Frankly, they bring the toxicity to Ward Radio whenever he goes on Ward Radio's show. Which, by the way, they did a show about his appearance on Jubilee. But it's so it's wild. But I was thinking we could start out. I mean, hey, welcome, by the way, Maven.
Hello.
It never got mentioned. Maven's here with us today. And we just kind of go through the claims that are made by Jacob on the Jubilee video. What do you guys think?
Sounds good.
Does that work, Gene?
Say that again.
I was saying we could play the video. I can load it.
So you gave me the video with Jacob Hansen's sort of reaction to his own appearance, right?
Right. I haven't. Yeah, and that's not the one we're talking about. I was talking about the Jubilee video. I have that. I'll download it on my computer.
Yeah, and so I was actually, since somebody asked it for the Jubilee link, I was looking up the real Jubilee link as well. And so at first I thought what you sent was the Jubilee link. And so now I'm including the link to the Jubilee link, because the first one was a Thoughtful Faiths show.
There's so many videos.
Are you able to pull yours up, Joe, or are you needing it to come from our side?
I think I can pull it up
Okay.
if you're the way I normally do. If you're cool with that.
Yeah, you should be able to pull that up.
Let me see if I can load it from my hard drive here. I mean, from a certain location. Not that I download YouTube videos. What? No.
No, I totally do. I'll say it.
Okay, so I have it in the studio. Let me roughly cue it up here.
So it looks like Wesley is predicting 13 more days for Jesus to come.
No, 13 days ago. So it already happened. Real bread from Jesus.
Yeah. So I missed it. Well, I was watching CNN all day 13 days ago and didn't see one Jesus news story. But
okay, Wesley.
So add to stage.
Oh.
So man, Coley.
So talk to me. Where does Jesus claim to be God?
Yeah, so
It's debatable what the synoptic.
Okay, here we are.
Sorry,
Oh,
you've
no,
been
that's
voted
great.
out by
Hey,
the majority.
Great to meet you too. Hey, how's it going?
Alex, it is great to meet you. I've been
Nice
a
to
fan
meet
of
you.
yours for a long time, even though I'm a believer.
Thank you so much.
So-
That means all the more.
You claim that this was a later tradition that developed. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, when would you say that tradition developed?
Probably fairly early on. I mean, the writings of Paul are decades after Jesus' death.
Okay, so do we have a better source for knowing what Jesus actually claimed than the Gospels?
No, we don't.
Okay, so if the Gospels are indeed the best source for understanding who Jesus was, do those Gospels portray him as a divine person?
Well, like I say, I think that there's only one gospel that unambiguously portrays Jesus as himself claiming to be divine, and that's the Gospel of John, which is the latest and most theologically motivated of all of the Gospels. Even then, the claims that we're talking about, things like, before Abraham was, I am, the Greek term there is ego eimi. One chapter later, in John chapter 9, Jesus heals a blind man, and the blind man goes back, and people say, were you not the man who was born blind? And what does he say? Ego eimi, I am. It's also just a way of identifying yourself and saying, it's me.
I would want to know then, in the Synoptic Gospels,
Yes.
are they claiming that Jesus is just a mere man?
I think that it's debatable what the synoptic authors are doing, but I'm happy to grant that the synoptic authors were trying to portray Jesus as God and thought that Jesus was God. I have
So,
no
so
problem
that
saying
means all four gospel writers were intending to portray Jesus as God.
that
Is
may be the
correct?
case, yeah.
I'm going to pause it there. I just want to clarify so much.
I'm going to disagree with that.
Right?
Yeah.
Also, first of all, he says the synoptic gospels. Then he says the four gospels. Okay, not all four gospels are synoptic gospels. So there's
Right.
one. And he gets called out on that in other places. So fine. And do people know the difference? I don't know. And does it even matter? There actually is one gospel that claims that Jesus was just a man. And but it's not one of the four that we see in the Bible. And how old it is, no one actually knows. It's called the Gospel of the Hebrews, a gospel according to the Hebrews or of the Hebrews. And we don't even have the original text. We don't have the original text of any of these. The third thing I just want to point out is he does mention something. Do we have anything about the life or teachings of Jesus apart from the Gospels? But just a moment before, they were talking about Paul. And he goes, no, we don't. I'm like, whoa, you just said it. Hold on. The earliest gospel is Paul's gospel, actually. It's just a little tiny piece of Corinthians. And that's why nobody calls it the gospel. But the thing that's interesting is that while that is, yes, decades after the life of Jesus, if that is to have happened, it is the only one that could possibly have been from a contemporary of Jesus, somebody who lived at the time of Jesus. Mark, Matthew, John, Luke, all much later, unless, of course, Luke is actually an expansion of Marcion's gospel, and Marcion's gospel was before, but we don't know that, and it doesn't matter because nobody knows that one. So what's interesting here is that we get to this topic that I've talked about several times. I had a whole episode with Richard Carrier about this, is that these Mormons are discovering Jesus mythicism and don't even know it, which is not to say that we believe that it can be convincingly said that Jesus was never a man and that he didn't, and that he started with a myth, but that it's more plausible than people tend to give it credit for, given that the Gospels, as Alex is pointing out here, they're all later inventions, late first century at the earliest, second century for the most part. So it's interesting to me that this how it suddenly becomes a reasoning for Jacob and other Mormon creators saying, this guy is validating all of our claims about Mormonism and the end of the witnesses of the Book of Mormon in particular. When I said, and I look at it and I go, it's not so much that as that he's invalidating Jesus. And as Christians, maybe you should be concerned about that, right? So that's where I'm at so far on that.
Well, maybe you're
muted, mate.
Thank you. Okay. So from what I understand, starting with the Gospel of Mark, it's actually kind of the least miraculous, and it's the most, it paints Jesus as the most human like and normal. And whereas again, as you progress, which is again where we see, I think the mythicism come in, is that the later accounts get more and more overt and more obvious about his claims being divinity. Whereas in the beginning, he's just a servant. He's just somebody called of God. He's a man, and yes, he's doing miraculous things, but it's power given to him by God, and all the glory is going to God. And then as you get to the Gospel of John, then it's coming back to him, and there's this more raw, more obvious, more overt narrative that, and I think that has to do with the changing, as things were changing there, I guess, live on the scene with him supposedly being their savior, this Messiah who's not supposed to die, but then he does die. So now we've got to like rework the narrative to, he's going to come back later and do all of this stuff. Anyway, I just thought that was interesting that Alex said that they all kind of paint him to be, a divine character when it's really John that does that the most, or like really strongly. So I didn't think really that the Synoptic Gospels did that as much as maybe they think. But anyway, there's been some people asking about Alex O'Connor. I want to say, I think he's a philosophy major. He's and was at University of Oxford. Is that where he, one of the fancy UK universities? So I actually used to watch Alex O'Connor a lot when in the beginning of my deconstruction, before I got into really any Mormon stuff. I would watch like the Atheist Experience, Jimmy Snow, although I would skip his Mormon stuff because I just wasn't ready to hear it about my own, weirdly. But anyway, Alex O'Connor is incredibly smart. And I found him useful initially, but he's really into the philosophy and the like wrestling deep religious questions in general. While I was in like deconstruction phase, I'm unlearning all of these things that I was learning. So I moved on from Alex in a while, but I did want to give Jacob some credit here as someone that we kind of know tends to want to chase big platforms. Like the Jubilee was a really, really awesome opportunity and a really big get for him, including Alex O'Connor. And it was interesting to me to hear that he was a fan of Alex, because I also know that Jacob is a fan of other kind of evangelicals that are maybe not so known for their intellectual capabilities. Maybe not Kent Hovind, but who is it? Like William Lane Craig, David Wallace, others that have, I think, really, really problematic. I think even as a Mormon believer, I would have found these guys problematic, but Jacob doesn't. He's fans of them, and he uses their talking points in his own stuff. So anyway, I think, I just wanted to say, like, I guess congrats to Jacob. It's interesting to me that he knows who Alex is and that he was able to get this gig. It was definitely, Jacob really tries to be relevant. I think and strives to be in a way, much bigger than he is. And I guess this is just kind of, proof that if you keep trying, you can eventually maybe get into these kinds of places. Yeah.
I think you mean clout chase to
he landed some good clout. Yeah.
That's good.
I'm
doing
some clout chasing by inviting Sam on. And so, Sam, if you have any comments,
is that my role here?
Sam,
thank you for providing us clout.
Sam, you used to be a bishop, didn't you, in the LDS Church?
That's correct.
So he can give us the bishop's viewpoint, the former bishop's viewpoint.
Once a bishop, always a bishop.
That's right.
That's right.
So did we have any more, I guess, about this clip that was shown? I did feel like Jacob was kind of doing it's like the slippery slope combined with like moving the goalposts. It's like moving goalposts down a slippery slope where it's just like, if I can get you to admit this, then I'll just kind of like tag on a whole bunch of other stuff with it. That's what I saw here.
Yeah, I think we can continue. What do you think, Vid?
Yeah.
So I think you have to pull the video back up.
Put it back up on stage.
Now, in the first century Hebrew culture, do you worship anyone other than God?
Depends what you mean by worship. So the Greek word for worship used in the New Testament is, I don't know how to pronounce it, proskynene or proskunine, something like that, which typically in the Hebrew is translated in the Septuagint to that word, proskynene. In the Hebrew is a word which just means something like bow down before. So for example, the same word is used when Jacob bows down before Esau. The same word is used when Joseph's brothers bow down before him when he's the governor of Egypt. The same word is used for King David, for example, in multiple books of the Bible.
But in the Synoptic Gospels, is Jesus portrayed as being worshipped?
I think at some points, yes. So, for example, at the end of John's Gospel with Doubting Thomas, at the beginning in the birth narratives, of course, I think the birth narratives were forged in later additions to the New Testament.
I want to focus entirely on the Synoptic Gospels, because those seem to be the one that you think are the most shaky on this.
Fine by
in
me.
the Synoptic Gospels, is the charge of blasphemy given against Jesus?
Yes.
Absolutely, right?
Yes, yeah.
Can you be given the charge of blasphemy merely for claiming to be the Messiah?
Well, let's find out. In the book of Acts, St. Stephen has a vision before the Pharisees. What vision does he have? He looks up before the Pharisees and he says, I can see God and I can see Jesus sat at the right hand of God. Separating Jesus and God, what do the Pharisees do? They stoned him to death for blasphemy. So we know that you didn't have to claim that Jesus was identical to God in order to be stoned for blasphemy.
How about
You don't have to pull me back up. I just want to pause and note here. People will note there in the bottom left-hand corner, the red flags that start counting. That's how many people, this is the system they've devised for this. That's how many people are voting to get Jacob to sit down. So that's what you're seeing there.
It's the
So we'll carry
cane
on.
to like yank somebody off the stage.
That's right. Or the cane to tap. What's that old story about tapping somebody with their cane at the at conference or something to get them to wrap it up, sit down?
Oh yeah.
Am I the only one who
I know
remembers
there's a
that?
story like that where somebody's getting and then they're like, I'll finish when I finish. I'm gonna keep going.
I like how much Alex knows.
Is it, and are they doing it because they disagree with Jacob? Because I know he's the lone Mormon among a bunch of evangelicals. Is that right? So is that why
At this point, Jacob hasn't mentioned that he's Mormon.
Okay.
I think it's that he's losing the debate points. That's all I can think.
Okay, so they're like, give someone else a chance. Okay.
And he later, when he was on Ward Radio, hey friends, how you doing? When he was on Ward Radio, he's talking about how he was so nervous because he knows there's 10 million people who are going to be watching this. And then he gets up there and he's like, it's my one chance to say something, to assert my faith. And it's like, yes, we are still dealing with a Mormon after all. I remember it, Jacob. I was there once. So yeah.
Right.
Shall we continue?
Yeah.
Maybe
judging the entire world?
I'm sorry, Gene. What's that?
I can do this.
Oh, okay.
Is that something that a human would do?
I suppose it'd have to be a very special kind of human. I understand that you think that only God can judge, sure.
So did the Synoptic Gospels portray Jesus as the one who is going to judge the world?
I think that may be true. The Synoptic Gospels may portray him as being that. What I'm asking for is, in Jesus' own words, or indeed in his own actions, claiming to be God. For example, a moment ago you said that he was stoned for blasphemy. Can he be stoned for blasphemy for doing something other than claiming to be God? In the book of Acts, St. Stephen is stoned for exactly that. So do you agree that that, at least, isn't an indication that Jesus is claiming to be God?
I don't know that they necessarily were stoning him for that exact thing. I don't know the exact context of that. With that in mind, the divine birth of Jesus is another factor that's in all the Synoptic Gospels. In those Gospels, Jesus is born of a Virgin Mary and the Holy Spirit.
It's only in two of the Synoptic Gospels, and in Luke's, at least, is probably a later edition. It wasn't in the original version of Luke.
Regardless, is Jesus' birth portrayed as a normal human birth?
No, not at all.
In all of the Synoptics. So if he's not a man,
only two of them.
Well, that's fine. If he's not a man in these Gospels, then what is he?
Well, again, I'm happy to say that the Synoptic authors were portraying Jesus as God, especially whoever added the birth narrative to Luke after the fact. I've got no problem with that.
You just don't trust those Gospels?
No, in the same way that I don't trust the legendary accounts surrounding the birth of Alexander the Great.
Okay.
I don't think that he was God either.
Is there a better, more reliable source for the historical Jesus than the Gospels?
No. But within the Gospels, there are more and less historically reliable points. So as I've already said, there are seemingly sources. So for example, when Jesus says something in Aramaic on the cross, when he says, Eli, Eli.
Did Jesus...
Okay, pause. Sorry, you've been voted out by the majority. Please return to your seat.
Cheers, good fun. Nice to meet you.
Great to meet you.
You can pause it now.
Is there a better and more reliable source than these records of Alexander the Great that depict him as a god? Like, it seems completely lost on Jacob that he wasn't able to respond to what Alex was challenging him with, and it completely undermined the claim.
Agreed.
Right. Yeah.
I think so. All right. So when I found out that Jacob had any interaction with Alex, I was genuinely surprised because again, there's just a difference in levels. Like, no hate on Jacob for this. I do think a lot of it has to do with being Mormon because your mind is in really such a box. There's so much programming. There's so much of your own like thought control happening that prevents you from being able to consider certain topics very seriously, just because there's just that built-in alarm system that certain ideas are dangerous and your brain will literally shut down. So I think when it comes to philosophy and really, working through things, Alex has been able and has done the work to really explore things from all points, all sides of these issues in a way that Jacob, as a believing member, cannot. And so I know Jacob likes philosophy. I know he's very familiar with the terminology, but whenever he uses it or whenever he tries to engage like this with somebody like Alex, I think the gaps are really clear and obvious, at least to somebody like me. However, again, I do think that at least in some areas, we do think about some things in religion a little bit more deeply than maybe evangelicals do. So I think among the audience, maybe Jacob and Alex look like they're on the same level, the similar level, I guess, maybe compared to the rest of the room. But overall, I think Jacob, just due to his belief, is not equipped to actually really sincerely par with the levels and the likes of Alex O'Connor, just because they just don't have that freedom to actually explore. And like you were saying, Sam, sometimes you just don't even actually understand the question, because as soon as the question lands, the programming is already running and a different question is being answered than what was actually presented. And I think that's a really common indication that you're talking to somebody that's under this kind of influence of this kind of thought control, is just when you can ask a straight up plain English question to somebody that seems unable to take it and treat it like face value as it actually is, but has to, I don't know, it's like playing 3D chess when really the game is just like, it's just a simple thing. We're asking you to play tic-tac-toe here, but you're trying to bring in all of this extra information and all this other stuff because you're trying to answer different questions that you think they're answering or that you think they're asking, again, all because of the programming. So that's what I'm seeing here. Does that make sense to everyone?
I think it's calculated. So Jacob's in a debate here, and he's told me on more than one occasion, a debate is not about coming to the truth. It's about winning, right? So he doesn't acknowledge any validity in what the other person is saying. So whatever programming might go into maybe an average Mormon's response to a challenge to their belief, I think my view is that Jacob Hansen is well outside of that. He's not average in.
He's not being genuine
way.
The way like a genuine member would be trying to answer these, like as a missionary or something.
He goes out of his way to at least appear to respond to criticisms as opposed to sheltering in place, which is the standard advice and behavior of church members. So he goes out and he's belligerent and makes these claims. To me, the thing that stands out there is, Jacob, you are applying an inconsistent evidentiary standard, because you seem to think that these alleged eyewitness testimonies for Jesus' divinity are meaningful, but you don't think Alexander the Great is God, right? So you've got the same kind of evidence. It's the same type of evidence, and he doesn't give one bit of credence to the Alexander the Great divinity claim, but he does to the Jesus claim. And I would submit that's because he's the victim of childhood religious indoctrination.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So you're seeing, I think, maybe more deliberate intent behind it, and I'm seeing it as more really not so deliberate, just that it's just a piece that's not landing because of thought control. It just didn't even actually. I don't think it actually hit long enough for him to genuinely consider it. I think it bounced off. That's whether it's deliberate or not.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that you have a point there. Like looking at his body behavior, it looks like he's just impatiently waiting for Alex to stop talking so that he can say his next thing. He's not taking in and responding to what Alex is saying.
No, it's an act. Yeah.
Which is what's so impressive actually about Alex in this situation is that Alex has to listen because he's responding. He's got to be ready, Johnny, on the spot with any answers, and he's delivering them, and they're valid points. I don't think I've heard Alex actually make a statement that can't be that's not valid by the historical record so far. I mean, so I'm like, he knows the words. He knows what's word. Furthermore, he knows what words Jacob is misusing. Like every time that Jacob uses synoptic, and he's like, but he doesn't call him out because that's going to shut down that conversation, just make Jacob look bad. So he lets it go, and he just keeps going on and he just follows up to what Jacob is saying. And it's like, that's really the stronger debater, in my opinion, is that, Jacob, I've called him out on this before when I was on Mormon News Roundup, about what he really does is he gish gallops. And, Divas had said, he's actually a very good debater. I said, he's really not actually. He's a gish galloper. Which is to say, he gets a whole bunch of words, lines them up in the magazine, and just fires them. And you're right. That's exactly what happens is while the other person's talking, you can see in his eyes and in his reactions that he's just waiting for his chance to talk and just thinking about what he's going to say when you finish talking. And so it's like the other person, it's just a gap when they stop talking. I'm just going to keep going. So, yeah. So I was thinking, Gene, we could watch the follow-up video that Jacob did. What do you think?
Yeah, can you pull that up so that you can control where the thing is again? And I'll say one thing about Jacob is, to me, he does a really good job. Even if somebody makes mistakes and they're debating, they're way better than me just because they're opening their mouth. And I have a hard time thinking a whole thought and putting it out there. That's why I have guests on my show all the time, is because I rely on people who are interesting coming on my show to make me look interesting. So there's one thing that
there is something
does.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Gene. Finish.
Go ahead.
I wanted to say that there is something to being able to answer things quickly, whether or not you answer them well, which I don't think Jacob does. Again, I don't think a lot of it is maybe as intentional as people think that it is. But he does. I think he's also really good at throwing out red herrings. And maybe, so I guess if we're talking about debates and as far as actually getting to the center of a subject and to the issues, and if we're looking at them in a really genuine sense where each side is taking each other seriously and their points seriously, maybe that's one kind of a debate win, and that's where the ideas win. I think that's the real idea behind debates. That's what they're supposed to be like. But I think it has kind of become a thing that if you can distract your opponent enough, or gish gallop, or throw out red herrings, if no one actually ever gets anywhere, but you keep your opponent on their back foot most of the time, then that's the kind of win that I think a lot of people are. That's the more entertaining one to watch, and I think that's the type that Jacob's more would tend to go to, and I think more equipped for, because his ideas, I think, do not stand up well on their own, and especially not against a very educated opponent. So so I think Jacob's doing really well, considering he does have an educated opponent. This isn't something that he can just be his normal, fully caustic self with. So he does have to be on his best behavior and still also try to get some points across. And I think overall he's doing a really good balance on this, from how he usually is to how he wants to be portrayed. I think he nails it, honestly.
It got him dinner with Alex, right? He said he spent 4 hours dinner with Alex, and he thinks Alex is either that close or at least a dry Mormon right now.
Almost, thou persuadest me.
Yeah. Persuadest me. And so that's, Diamond Dave does have a good point. I guess debates format goes back hundreds and maybe thousands of years, where the internet is only like hundreds or thousands of months old, we'll say.
The thing that's interesting about that is, if my memory serves, Jacob has done Lincoln Douglas debate, which I have done. I know Jenny, who's a Life Take 2, she's in the comments, and she did that too. He knows how a debate goes. He knows how to flow chart a debate. And this is not the way, right, my friend? This is not the way.
Are we going to look at the follow-up final conversation that he had?
Yeah, I just got that.
To the stage.
Joe, I think Joe's bringing that up, but can you explain more what you just said?
Not the follow-up video that Jacob made. I mean, there's another interaction between Jacob and Alex in the Jubilee video.
All right. Alex calls Jacob up as
Yeah.
his one guest that he lets bring up a claim to him, I believe.
Oh yeah, should we bring that back?
Yeah,
That video,
let's
that part?
bring that video back and go to it's probably the last 10 minutes, I think, right?
It's at the very end. Yeah.
Yeah.
At the end.
Okay.
And what were you
And
saying, David?
I was wanting to know to hear more from Joe. So are you disagreeing with me that Jacob is nailing, I guess, what I think Jacob is trying to do, but you're saying he's not doing very well, or he's
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry, Maven.
Yeah, no.
Yes.
What do you mean? I mean, like, as far as winning it, actually, because I mean, as far as like, I think what he's trying to do, and especially trying to be on like good behavior with someone as like tactful and refined and as knowledgeable as Alex O'Connor is, while still trying to bring in some of his usual tricks, but trying to do it in a more like nicer way to look more genuine, like both intellectually and just, personality wise. And you're saying that's not the track Jacob should have taken. You say he should have been the normal, usual Jacob that we're used to. Is that what you're saying?
No, I mean, half of it was true. Yeah,
Oh.
half of that is what I'm saying. Yeah.
Okay.
And I'll have to point out that I have a horse behind me, just like Maven does.
We'll
get it right there because my daughter bought a 3D printer, and so now we each have our own tapers.
Nephite horses.
Tapers.
Articulated, so they can move a little bit, like a little toy that you can play and have some fun with while you're waiting for Joe to turn on the chat thing.
All dies of leukemia affirming this narrative that was so.
Let me see if I can cue it up here.
I see.
It's very
about 1 hour 20 minutes in, or 1 hour 22 minutes in.
I like that guy's shirt, the last guy. That's probably good to start right there.
So,
all the other Christians are probably
which might
cringing.
Bother some people in this circle, and this is why I thought maybe we could find a little bit of middle ground here.
Like it.
Because I represent a form of Christianity that a lot of people don't even consider as Christian. I'm a Latter-day Saint, also known as a Mormon.
Awesome.
And my claim is that
faces.
the restored gospel, also known as Mormonism, provides a conception of God that is more rationally defensible than any other creedal Christian sect.
Okay.
Creedal.
Tell me why. I must admit, I don't know very much.
It's only
the
Mormons.
creedal ones.
And it's not the win that Jacob thinks it is. Like, even if that's true, I think he's unable to see that there's still a lot more work to be done, even, when Alex will give that to him.
And I think we have to not fail to mention that Mormonism is not some kind of coherent conception of God. It's been an inconsistent steaming pile of theological fertilizer from the beginning. And so the idea that whatever conception of a Mormon God that Jacob has in his head is Mormonism, that I just laugh at and say, no, Jacob doesn't speak for Mormons or Mormonism. Why isn't Russell M. Nelson up here talking to Alex O'Connor? Jacob is a nobody when it comes to declaring the mind and the will of the Mormon God. And
he's a rando.
I never would have supposed.
He is a rando, and it's absurd that he thinks his proprietary flavor of Mormonism that contradicts what gets spoken over the pulpit is Mormonism.
I like all the new words that Jacob is helping us learn, like creedal Christianity and what were the things the Paul brothers said?
Yeah,
that's been a while. Conceptualize.
Yeah.
They find a word and they use it over and over again until it has absolutely no meaning.
Yeah, it's not codified. There's no codified.
Codified, there you go.
From these.
That's from a prior Jubilee show.
From these woke scolds. No, but I do want to say before we go on, though, by the way, the answer to your question, Sam, about why Russell M. Nosferatu is not up here is because he has to return to his native earth in his coffin, but so he could regenerate. That's it.
About Mormon theology. I know you also don't like being called Mormons, right? So I don't quite know what term, what term to use.
We generally are known
Latter-day Saints.
Latter-day Saints, the church, a member of the Church of
theology,
Jesus
let's
Christ.
say.
Yes. Our theological claims, for example, the problem of evil. Okay, so the way that we address it. So the problem really, so far as I can tell, that you have isn't so much with suffering, right? Because suffering could be something that is justifiable. Right?
Yeah, in principle, it's sort of the amount of suffering, the depth of suffering.
Absolutely. So the issue really is injustice. It's
it's not injustice. It's suffering, particularly suffering.
Yeah.
I just have to point out, this is classic Jacob, is to tell you as the interlocutor what your problem is and what the debate is actually going to be about. So it's not what you think it is. It's not your position. You're now having to defend that what he's defining the debate to be is not what the debate actually is. Classic Jacob right here.
And again,
and he corrects him. He says that's not what it is, and you'll see that he keeps going back to this, trying to say, no, this is what it's about.
And I think this is why Jacob appears to win debates, is because he does this where he's taking control of both sides and trying to orchestrate it that way. And again, I think this is just a capability thing. I think as much as Jacob likes to think that he's on equal par with somebody like Alex, ultimately he lacks the skills and the knowledge to be as genuine and honest and authentic as somebody like Alex is. And I don't think Jacob can do a bait and not behave the way that he does. So if that makes sense, that's why I think it's not a choice so much. Like in a way it's a deliberate choice, but also it's not a choice as in I don't think he can actually act differently. I don't think he has that capability.
And ironically, I feel like one of the things that Jacob prides himself in is that he thinks that he steelmans his interlocutor's position. Mm-hmm. He's clearly not doing that here.
He doesn't even know. Like, he doesn't even know how. He doesn't even know what he's missing.
To me, Jacob steelmans the position that unicorns are real. And if you can believe that, you'll believe everything I say after that.
Yeah, right. Well, that's one of his things. It's like, you have to grant me that like theism is a thing, or grant me that Christianity is a thing. And like,
then I'm right from now on.
Yeah, right.
I was just happy to see that he talked about justice at all, because like when he was on my program, Jacob, and he was talking to me, we were talking about the Church of Korihor, and he was and we got into you have to talk about, Mormons and atheism, and ex-Mormons and atheism. Where do your values come from? And I just scratched the surface. I had gone in ready to go full tilt on social Darwinism and the tragic, and how much I see in the tragedy of social Darwinism. And he hit me out of left field with this. And I'm like, oh, are we really going to talk about that? I thought we were going to talk about this hierarchical. Okay, whatever, fine. And I said, well, what do you understand about justice? And he's like, well, what do you mean? And I said, well, like Rawls justice, John Rawls' theory of justice. And then we started going into it. And he really seemed to be listening to me. And I'm like, all right, we're making progress here. Apparently not as much progress as I thought.
Yeah, he talking about morality is his shtick with atheists, because he arrogantly holds the opinion that to talk about things at a higher level, like the demonstrably false truth claims of Mormonism, is like talking to an elementary school kid about calculus. First, you need to talk to the atheist about at the level of plus and minus arithmetic and get them to understand that no, you have to have theism. And then and only then do you progress to, okay, now we can establish Christianity. And then and only then do you get into, hey, I can pick and choose what bits of history I want to pay attention to and what words of the prophets I want to pick and pay attention to. Voila, Mormonism is true. Like the arrogance, the idea that we can't talk about all these other claims of Mormonism without granting, okay, no, there has to be theism first. And he really won't engage until you follow him up that ladder.
Right. Yeah, no, that's a good analogy for it, I think, is that you do have to follow him up the ladder. He'll tell you that it's a highway. He'll tell you that it's a plane, but it's a ladder. It's a ladder that goes mainly down. Shall we continue?
Yep.
Yeah, maybe put it up there.
Non-human animals.
Okay, and fair enough. So with the concept of injustice, the Latter-day Saint conception of God is that God actually, his purpose is to make us become as he is.
Yes. Does that include animals as well?
Animals are part of the created order that will be redeemed along with the rest of the created order.
Okay, so what does suffering do for them?
Suffering is part of the inherent nature of the world as a fallen world, okay?
Even for animals?
Yes, even for animals.
Whose fault is that?
Let me break
Sorry,
it down.
I'm throwing a lot of questions.
Yeah, let me break it down like this.
Sure.
So if I have a child, and I want my child to grow up to become like me, my child needs to go out of my house.
Yep.
He needs to go into the lone and dreary world. And if that is the case, that means that there's going to be some level of separation between me and him. He's in the world of injustice. It's a world that is unfair.
Why is that world unjust and unfair? Because I understand what you're saying. In this analogy, you want your child to become like you. And what that's going to involve is encountering suffering, developing as a person, getting thicker skin. But the only reason that you want that for your child is because they're going to live in a world where they're going to have to encounter that, and you want them to be better at dealing with that, right? If you were given the opportunity to give your child a life that was separate from you, where they went about and did their business, but there wasn't that kind of suffering, and you chose the one in which there was suffering just for the sake of it, I think that would be problematic.
Well, it's not that I chose to put them in that world. See, this is a difference in Latter-day Saint theology.
That's what I'm interested in.
In Latter-day Saint theology,
So, I mean, just to encapsulate that for a moment, okay? You can see in Alex's eyes while he's listening, he goes, oh, this guy thinks he's as smart as I am. This guy, he's like, I'm going to, this guy just became a foil in my hand. He just became a cudgel that I can use to ever so gently just beat all these Christians right on the top of their heads, and they're not even going to know. I feel like he really does feel that Jacob is arrogant. I hope I hope they have more rapport. It does seem like Jacob thinks that they do, but I think he sees in this an opportunity to look around and sit and show everybody else and say, you all think you're so clever. You all think you're like this guy, but he's making my point for me. I mean, does that not seem like it to you?
I think it's obvious to maybe most viewers that Jacob is arrogant, especially because you see him get like so excited when he gets to this, like, see, this is where we're different. And honestly, at that, I really felt, I guess, a bit of a connection with Jacob there, at least with my old self. I'm thinking of back on a mission whenever I heard, people express problems that they have with religion in general, which, I typically were evangelical kind of issues regarding unfairness, things like that. I remember feeling the exact same way, like just excited to be like, look, I have a theology, I have a message that answers those questions and just fixes everything, and just being like, just being so excited in a way, like that's the best way to put it. But thinking, we really do. I'm there. I have a better product to sell to them. I wasn't thinking in those terms. Obviously, I thought I had a better theology, a real, true theology that would make their lives better and solves these like questions that these other religions have. And so I don't know. I kind of felt that same like almost like missionary-ish kind of excitement of someone just gave me an opening for me to really spell out why we have something like so much better and will be what you want, or at least what I thought people would want or should want. So, yeah.
Yeah, so it looks like that clip went a little bit long, maybe. And so we got a stream unavailable. So we can still finish up and we can limit it, and we can let Sam talk and then head out.
Well, an observation that I wanted to make is that, so we understand the challenge that Alex is presenting to Jacob's theology, is that to Alex's thinking, it's problematic that God, who seemingly could have chosen otherwise, created or oversees, supervises this universe, this world, where all of this seemingly gratuitous suffering is happening. In particular, he's going to talk about non-human animal suffering. And so Jacob thinks that Mormonism, his flavor of Mormonism, is so special because if I understand what he's trying to say is that this gratuitous suffering is part of the fabric of the universe. It couldn't be any other way, and God didn't make it that way. Like, God is powerless over here to not have a universe where there's gratuitous suffering. And I lost my train of thought.
No, but that is, I call it sometimes, I'm following along with what you're saying here. I call it sometimes the Eden defense. It's like God made Eden, we made the lone and dreary world by sinning. But that doesn't actually line up with Mormon theology, because the whole principle of Mormon theology from the Book of Mormon is supposed to be the bitter and the sweet, and, you know, Adam fell that men might be. This is all happening according to plan. So, the theology is broken no matter how you slice it. But you have to talk to somebody who's read the Book of Mormon to get that nuance, right? That's what I find remarkable. It's like he has the advantage over Alex O'Connor, I think, here, in that he could talk to him about what the Book of Mormon says. He could talk to him about what's in Doctrine and Covenants, but he doesn't, because he's not talking to Alex. He's talking to the audience. He's talking to Jubilee's audience, which apparently we're not allowed to do.
I think I got my thought back. So on the one hand, he's just invoking gratuitous suffering as a brute fact of the universe. And he doesn't like when atheists or anybody who disagrees with him plays the same game. So it's a just so story he's presenting, and I can do just so stories too. I can say that it's just a brute fact that consciousness exists. It's just a brute fact that morality exists, or whatever. So that's one point. And then the other one is that he simply lacks the imagination that, like, I have no problem imagining a universe created by a God who could do things a little bit differently and reduce some gratuitous suffering, if not all of it, right? And Jacob apparently lacks the creativity to imagine that even as a logical possibility, because his argument is it's logically impossible to expect God to create a universe that doesn't have the gratuitous suffering that we see.
Right. And only just suffering like from consequences of our own actions, which would make more sense, I think. But again, I also think that the reason why it's either an intellectual like mishmash in general, and Jacob just isn't up to par with that, or I think at least some blame is on thought control for him, like to not be able to genuinely consider these things.
So we're not going to be able to watch any more of the video?
No, we can watch clips, and we'll just keep on going.
Yeah, I don't know,
because there's important stuff that he says.
Yeah, we'll keep it going, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah,
we'll play fast and loose with it. That's cool.
I guess it's confusing. So some channels cut out and some didn't. Like I'm not sure what happened while we were.
It looks like we all went down. I've been following it here on my channel, and it looks like the stream went down, and then we came back.
Then it restarted when I went back to look. That's what it was. That's it.
Okay.
Oh.
I didn't notice that my channel went down at all, and I know my like Maven channel is not monetized. I don't know if that makes a difference for maybe why they would have put if mine didn't go down. Maybe it did, like with everyone else. But when I checked, it was still there. So anyway, thanks audience for sticking with us. But yeah, some channels are like super on the
yes, Maven's is on still live.
Yeah. So cool. Do we think like is there a limit? Like the last one didn't seem all that long. It's really just a couple at a time before we're breaking it up. So that seems really intense.
It was feeling a little bit more than 2 minutes, the last one.
Okay. All right.
So let's do it shorter.
Yeah.
We'll keep it less than 2 minutes. See if that causes problems.
Okay.
A pre-existence and human beings knowing the unjust nature of reality have the choice.
Oh, they choose to,
They
yes.
choose to enter into the mortal state,
Sure.
to pass through. The way to look at it is there's this realm of injustice where anything can happen. I can go out tomorrow, my kid can get cancer, all these things can happen. And the idea is we say, but if you're willing to pass through the realm of injustice, this is a necessary condition to reach your divine potential.
How come? Why is it necessary?
This is another thing about Latter-day Saint theology that's different. Like, for instance, God cannot
Can we
create a
pause?
square circle.
Why does that apply?
I just want to say it's easy enough to talk about this kind of stuff that, you know, like that our kid can get cancer. And we see that as just part of the plan until you are one whose kid gets cancer. I haven't experienced this, but I do know of some people that lost a baby very young to a very aggressive brain tumor. And that baby suffered a lot, and it definitely affected their testimony. So again, I just want to say it's easy to be really flippant and almost like effusive, like he's almost saying it really happily, like, no, it's all great, like we choose this, we choose going into it for these things, for what we'll gain and we'll grow out of it. And it's a really flippant dismissal of the intense pain that actual experience like genuinely causes. And yeah, anyway, people going through what Jacob's talking about here maybe don't find it as exciting as he's kind of portraying it right now. I'll just say that.
I also, maybe I don't understand what his point is, but the fact that in Mormon theology you chose the gratuitous suffering doesn't solve the problem of the gratuitous suffering.
And it creates
doesn't.
a lot of problems on its own, for sure.
Yeah,
and because I know at the very least a lot of victims of SA are told this or taught this, like maybe that either that they chose, especially if it comes from parents, because a lot of times in Mormonism we're told that we chose the parents we came to. So to be a victim from, you know, as a child of things that adults do to you and you have no power against that, and then, you know, this kind of thing, this idea that we knew ahead of time, you know, almost making it our choice to have what happened to us rather than it being choices that adults made against our will and against our you know, our health. You know, anyway, this is a hugely problematic idea, besides, as you said, Sam, not actually answering the problem that he thinks it does.
And bizarrely, right before we cut off, he just said, hey, this is another place where Mormonism is super special and different. God can't square a circle or make a square circle, as if other people, other Christians haven't thought of the idea of logical impossibility, and they recraft the definition of omnipotence quite reasonably, I think, to rule out things that are logically impossible. Like, I don't know of any Christian that I might encounter who would say, no, I think omnipotence means you can do things that are logically impossible. Nobody says that. It's not a unique Mormonism thing. And as I said before, it's not logically impossible to have a universe that has less gratuitous suffering than we see here. And that's what Alex's challenge to his theology, to his claim is. He's not addressing the problem.
Facts. I mean, it basically, which ultimately is like, really what they're trying to get at here is God being necessary, because you have mathematical proofs, right? There are mathematical proofs for the existence of God that are supposed to be the rational argument to say it's just irrational for the atheist to assert that God doesn't exist, because none of this works. And, you know, and then you come out with the teleological argument, the ontological argument, the moral argument, and the Thomist argument. You go on and on and on. All of them are based upon this idea: God is necessary in order for the world that you are experiencing to even happen. And none of them have been particularly good. I think the ontological argument is probably the best in my opinion, but I still think, and I still think that it probably actually is the best argument that God doesn't exist. So it's like, this is the reason why most people don't do theology. They don't do these arguments, is because their faith is at
Because
risk.
It's not persuasive. Yeah.
When I was
Right.
young, the argument that we'll go get donuts after church proved the church was true.
In Mesa, it's Dairy Queen after a priesthood meeting.
There
right?
you go.
Yeah. So do we
So
dare?
maybe
I
put up
mean,
and then we'll play it a little bit more.
okay.
Here, I mean, why can't he do that?
Because God cannot bring you to your divine potential because of the nature of the laws of reality.
Okay, but like, why not? Because you're just sort of restating that he can't do it. I want to know why.
I know what I'm saying is that there are laws that even God is bound by.
Like, which laws are relevant here? Like, which laws is
Like the law of
God-
non-contradiction, for instance.
Explain to me how the law of non-contradiction binds God to not create a world where there's no suffering.
Because that relationship with God must be freely chosen, and God cannot force me. Because there is the question: why doesn't God just
This is a
make
total
us all
non
happy all the time?
sequitur.
Because God could make a world in which there's no suffering, which
Yeah.
Absolute
So-
non sequitur. It's like I know what my talking points are, and I'm just gonna repeat them again and again.
Right. But I mean, I think that Alex again is bringing this idea home and pointing out to him the logic of it, and he can't even hear it, right? Which is, as soon as I was watching this and I was sitting there and I said, this keeps coming back, that there are no laws that God has to abide by that aren't his law. And then I keep thinking, and I will always say, there is a law decreed before the foundations of the world, and everybody, God has to obey us in Mormon theology. Mormon theology dictates that if we are obedient to God, he must deliver on his promises every time, which is a very convenient thing for Joseph Smith to promise people whom he has told things like Newell K. Whitney. It's like, God has a special calling for you. Oh, really? What is it? All the money that you have lent to my family to keep us alive and to the church to build the temple, you're going to just go ahead and scratch that debt out and pretend it didn't happen. And that's how you'll serve the kingdom of God. Oh, wonderful. It's a very convenient thing then. But the problem is that it undoes the whole theology and about God being above all. Who gets to mandate God? Apparently we do. And he's just trying to point that out. Shall we go?
Yep.
you're still
I disagree.
in which you're still free to choose whether or not to follow him.
I would say that is a logical contradiction.
Okay, so maybe you can tell me why. Because right now what you're telling me is that it's illogical.
Go
So,
ahead.
Let the record show he's declaring that it's logically impossible for there to be a God who creates a world or oversees a world, supervises a world where there's not the gratuitous suffering that we see. He's like, that's the argument. This is a logical impossibility and he's just insisting on it rather than demonstrating it.
I agree.
On the level of creating a square circle, to create a system that a person can voluntarily choose to sort of exit the heavenly realm and go into in order to do whatever they need to do to get to God's ultimate
Not to
potential.
get to God, to become as he is.
Sure, to fulfill their full potential that has to involve not just suffering, but the kind of suffering that we see on planet Earth. I'm asking why that's logically necessary.
A totally unjust world, okay? Because it is by passing through this realm that we have the experience of injustice that allows us to know what injustice is.
But why do we need to know what injustice
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Sorry. He's just repeating this, like he's looping. He's just looping, saying the same thing again without answering the question. Clearly, I think he's saying the same thing again because in his head, it does answer the question. Like, it's a total non sequitur, but I think he thinks that he's answering the question.
Yeah, and he's doing it by skirting, frankly, the edges of Mormon theology, right? Because it's like if you're going to say, well, God had to create this mortal existence, or had to allow the creation of this mortal existence, not only does that mean that we can thwart God's plan, at least temporarily, but it also means that you're trying to make the assumption that after this life is over, suffering ends. And I don't know of any Mormon who believes in that. It's not consistent with this idea that we exist for eons and eternities in the future, and that we existed for eons and eternities into the past, and fought a war in heaven where some were more valiant than others, and the ones who were less valiant came to earth in other bodies. We don't. So.
Justices.
Because how else can you come to be like God? Kind of like the Adam and Eve story. There's the fruit of the tree of knowledge and good and evil.
So what is justice? How do you define justice?
Off the top of my head, I would say that justice is getting what you deserve.
Yeah, right. Okay. And so the problem is that, like, you can imagine a situation in which there was nothing wrong, nothing bad, nothing evil, and therefore no need for this rectifying force of justice. It's a little.
No.
We say justice is a good thing, but justice is a good thing insofar.
Can you know?
Hold on. Justice is a good thing insofar as it overcomes injustice. That's what it's there for. In the same way that chemotherapy is a good thing because it tries to overcome cancer. If I said that I was going to create cancer so that we could have the good of chemotherapy, and you said, why would you do that? And I said, because there's no way for us to achieve the good of chemotherapy without creating cancer. You'd look at me like I'd lost my mind.
No, it's like saying, this is the better analogy. It's like saying to my son, the only way that you can become the way I am is to go out into that world where anything could happen and to persevere.
Okay, so I
Once again, exactly to your point, Sam. He makes Alex makes a salient point. He illustrates it with a beautifully constructed example, and Jacob was just waiting for him to shut up so that he can go back to the exact same thing.
Give my better example. It's also ridiculous. So in Mormonism, in Jacob's Mormonism, this life is a blink of an eye, but it determines eternity. So important. And what the argument is, you have to do this gratuitous suffering. You have to do it in order to meet your potential. And then we look at the specific circumstances that various humans, Alex will get to animal suffering, non-human suffering, but just looking at humans, there is a vast spectrum of suffering. Some people are born into wealth. They have all of their needs met, and then other people are on the other end of that spectrum where they die right away, or just agonizing, constant pain.
Yeah.
So apparently, these people way up here, they could get their full divine potential with I'm very blessed. I was born into privileged circumstances in a wealthy country, peaceful country, where I didn't constantly fear being raped or murdered in my sleep, where law and order and a good Medicare or healthcare system was in place. That got those people to their divine potential. These people had to have awful, agonizing suffering. There's this total inequality in the suffering. And then what's the Mormon answer for that? It all gets taken care of after death. Like the particular suffering that you needed to do your divine potential is the suffering that you got here. It's just layer upon layer of just so why the tiger got its stripes.
And I think too, there's just like some real black and white thinking here, where it's like every action is something that was either right or wrong that deserves like reward or punishment. And it just doesn't leave room for things that are just neutral in general, decisions that like aren't really either one of those things. And then I guess there's times where like maybe the context could make all the difference in the world, whether something is, right or wrong. Again, like it leaves out, and I think this is where a lot of members just don't understand or leave out agency when they talk about like when we leave the church. It is just like where they talk about us as if just the very fact that we have left, or that we don't believe in God anymore, or that we don't believe coffee is a sin to drink, that it's just something that we will get punished for, and we should be punished for, and we know we should be punished for, and it's just stuff like that, where it's like it really doesn't matter. But when you're like overly focused on this idea of justice, then I think that's one of the weirdest things of being on this side of it, is seeing that people like Jacob would expect some kind of get justice for us, some punishment for things like drinking coffee, because to him those are morally wrong actions to take. Where and I do think in general, like evangelical Christians also do this to people who leave their faith, that they also view things as the same way. And I've seen, in their shows when they're trying to argue against sin or atheism, they just make everything fall into a category of either like virtuous acts or sinful acts. And it's not just like choosing to go to college is just a choice and it's amoral. It's just one or the other. It just depends on your like particular type of evangelism. So if it's a woman choosing to go to college when you feel like she shouldn't be, and she should be getting married right out of high school, then that's an evil choice that she has made, whereas if you don't feel that for men, then that's a good choice because that's, a provider choice or whatever. So it's just, it all depends on where you are in your theology, but everything is slotted one way or another into either righteous or an unrighteous act. And there's no just living. So, yeah. Or the mistakes is another thing. Like sometimes people just make mistakes and they can do that with genuine like intent of trying to do the right thing from start to finish, and just have not had the information to know what was going to happen, and ultimately chosen wrong or chosen something that maybe caused more harm than what they were intending. And like, again, that's just a mistake because we're human beings and we don't have full knowledge and foresight. So in Jacob's theology or in Christian theology in general, mistakes like that require a payment or a punishment. Yeah. And that's where Jesus comes in and has to like solve things for us and, bring about mercy for something that just, was a mistake. So,
yeah. Without ever questioning things, something like, well, what is the justice that requires God to repay this evil with evil done to another person? This person did this evil. Some other being has to come and pay. That's just logical. They tell you. It's like, Is it? How is it? It's a very curious way of looking at agency, the Mormon theology, that doesn't involve consent in any way. And and then Christianity has enough problems with it as it is. As I said to Kai Van Leuven when he was on my show, I said, open up the Bible and teach me about consent, particularly about sexual consent, because I can open up the Bible and give you lots of examples of how the Bible gets that wrong. But, and it's like, if Mormonism tries to introduce this first estate, second estate for the question of how is it justified that I should be born into a world where life is mainly made up of suffering when I didn't choose it? Hey, wait a minute. Well, you did choose it. You did choose it. And in fact, because you chose it in the past life, you were shown more valiant. Right, exactly. And because you were born in the covenant in the church, that means you were more valiant still. I'm sorry, is that logic that because I was born not black? Shush. No, we're not doing that anymore. Yeah, we're not doing that. Woman. Right, or a woman.
Yeah. Can I say, before we go into other clips, and I don't know if this will come up again, I'm the only one out of the three of us that is not a parent, but that is something, Jacob tried to bring in, as a parent, the whole sending kids out into the world thing. And I feel like this is used so much in Christianity to try to explain the state of the world. But I think if you are a decent parent, decent parents do not act the way that God does, I guess, in these examples. Do you guys want to talk on that or not? Or we can skip it. But yeah, I just thought.
I think for one contemplated wiping out my entire seed and restarting at some point when they were during the teen years. I think is when that contemplation comes up.
That's the closest for you, though.
That's my godlike. That would be my godlike response to my children's actions.
And get your kids to carry the wood for the sacrifice.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, because it would be like intentionally inflicting like illness on your children after they've left the house, like giving them cancer because they aren't talking to you enough now that they've left or something like that, just to be like, hey, remember you need me. You should be, working on this relationship a little bit more. It's that kind of stuff. It just doesn't equate. As parents, you're trying to prepare your children for the world as it is. If you're manipulating things in the world to make their experience objectively worse than it would be on their own, which it's already going to be tough enough as it is, right? If we just leave it, and that's how it could be with God too. That like if we're just leaving it to consequences of people's own actions, that's already enough. That's already what they have to deal with. So I can't imagine specifically adding in more suffering and just being like, I need you to go through this. This is important for whatever reason.
In fact, that's why I created a podcast, is to force my children to watch it so they would have to suffer as much as even I had to suffer.
And just to like take it back to bring clarity what Alex is saying, there is some kind of and some amount of suffering that he recognizes has value.
Mm-hmm.
He's specifically challenging Jacob to explain the gratuitous suffering, the suffering that is not necessary, that has no purpose. And what Jacob is saying is, it's just so. It's a brute fact of the universe, and it couldn't be any other way. This is his God.
Right. Yeah, I love that. That is his God. Is that basically you're making out a God who is this is the point, that the reason why these Christians are all groaning and moaning behind Jacob while he's trying to talk is because, as much as I do believe that Mormons are Christians, because Christianity historically encompasses such a broad amount of doctrines and ideas, but at the same time, pretty much every modern Christianity that we can talk about, at least in the Western world, is one where God is omnipotent in order to be necessary to the universe, to the existence of something rather than nothing. And that becomes problematic when you start saying, but he had to do this in order to answer our doing that, because we somehow are God, while he has a plan, we're the ones over here making a mockery of it and forcing his hand. And it's like, how is an omnipotent being's hand forced to do anything if he is omnipotent? So,
and if you think about it, the current model of God, we'll say in Jacob Hansen's Mormonism, is it's a God of obedience, right? Instead of a God of love. And instead of becoming like God by experiencing all kinds of things on earth, it's only in denying all your things and obeying the commandments do you become like God. And so that's two different gods that you can be, depending on, like Sam said, what year of Mormonism you grew up in.
Right. And but see, it's like, that's exactly the point, though. It's like, if we had to go through the war in heaven to come to earth, keep the first estate, come to earth, and even sons of perdition like me are better than Lucifer and his angels because we kept our first estate. Wait a minute, go back, rewind. Like, there's a comment here, and that's bringing up Jacob's point again. It's that we live in a world where evil exists because we're in a fallen world. Then what world was that where we fought a war where a third of our brothers and sisters didn't even make it here and became demons for Lucifer and his angels? What if that's not a world with agency? If that's not a world with good and evil? If that's not a world with bitter and sweet? Then what the heck is it? And how is it that we fought a war in it?
Right.
So it's like, and it's the same thing. I was bringing up, there's a gentleman, a young man who challenged me on my Wednesday service and came up live, and he was a very nice man. Porter, I've said this now multiple times. He was a nice kid. But I was talking to him, and I was like, what do you understand about damnation? The Mormon concept of damnation. And he hemmed and hawed about, okay, so let me just make it clear to you. Okay, you can go to if you keep your baptismal covenants, you're saved in the blood of Christ. You go to the celestial kingdom at the end, no matter what else you do, as long as you keep with your covenant, your baptismal covenant. But then if you're going to become exalted, you have to be married. And at one point, if you're a man, you had to be married to 3 women at one point, at least.
Yeah.
Roughly, depending on how it's.
That was the minimum.
Right. and so it's like, and if you don't, then your eternal progress is stopped, which is the definition of damnation. Unique to Mormon theology is you can get stuck here, be saved, but also be damned at the same time. And it's like, there is a valid case to be made that this is not Christian theology as most Christians know it. So, but that's something that you're not going to have him know.
Sam?
So, just anticipating what happens next in the clip. So Jacob's just made this non sequitur about, at least in Jacob's mind, it's very important that we chose to come into this realm of injustice. And so somehow for him, that explains away the gratuitous suffering. Like, we chose it. That doesn't make sense to me, but that's his position. And then
the God of S&M.
that for Jacob anyway, that explains human suffering. So we need to account for non-human suffering, and that's where Alex takes it next, I think.
Yeah, I definitely think that the Mormon God needs a lesson on enthusiastic consent. I'll do it if he needs it.
I still have a qualm with this, but for the sake of time, I want to ask you about animals. Do animals consent to go into this?
The animal kingdom is part of the fallen world. They are part of the fallen order.
Do they feel pain?
I don't know. That's more of a good question.
So wait,
I don't know necessarily.
Stop the presses. Jacob Hansen doesn't know whether animals suffer, whether they feel pain.
That sounds problematic.
Yeah, and
He's never stepped on a cat's tail.
And I call bullshit. This is not something that Jacob is confused about. This is him feigning ignorance because Alex has blown a hole in his theology. Humans chose. Somehow that works for Jacob. That explains gratuitous suffering. The animals didn't choose. Maybe Jacob needs to revise his Justo story to say that, yes, animals had some agency and they all chose, and then poof, that takes care of the problem for him. But on the spot, he didn't have that worked out in his head. And so he says, I don't know whether animals feel pain. And that takes the air out of Alex's challenge. If we can't be sure, if we don't agree that animals feel pain, we can't pursue the challenge.
That's right. It's almost like Jacob doesn't know what animals can sense and feel and whatever, but he knows exactly what God is thinking all the time.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. He can speak for God, but not for a pet dog or whatever that screams out in pain if it gets its toe stepped on or something.
I don't. I'm sorry, Maven. I'll make it quick. I could have sworn you were going to bring up that Jacob Hansen is very. He has shared this multiple times on multiple platforms. He enjoys mentioning that he is a hunter, that he enjoys hunting. That's one of his favorite pastimes. I'm not shaming the man. I'm just saying I don't know anybody who engages in hunting as a pastime who doesn't consider that there is pain for animals when they are hurt and when they die.
Maybe he's never considered humane ways of killing versus unhumane and what that would even mean in a world where he can't be sure that they're feeling pain.
Yeah, I think though, unlike I guess there's certain animals that we might not be really 100% sure when it comes to pain, but animals that are like us, right?
Oh, yeah.
Like mammals, you know, they have central nervous systems like we do. They're very similar to us. We know it's scientifically established that at least certain animals, particularly the ones that he hunts, absolutely, unequivocally, like this is fact, reality. We know that they can and do suffer. So yeah, I think that was a cop out. I think Jacob was lying.
And we do know flies can be resurrected.
Yep.
If you pray.
I mean, and if we want to go scriptures, okay, like I mean, there's the scriptures about that, you know, God is aware of even, you know, a dead sparrow. So I mean, I guess maybe that doesn't talk to pain, but that does talk to at least God's consideration and care and concern to be aware of even what we consider small wildlife when it has fallen. So Jacob could at least kind of take that track and at least pretend to be as aware and concerned as God is on that. So yeah,
it was a lie.
Yeah.
It was
That
a
was a
debate
bold-faced
tactic
lie.
lie. He's
Yeah.
not actually. He knows they suffer. He knows they feel pain. It was just
Yeah.
a lie.
Correct.
Sorry, we can keep going.
What's your confidence level? Like, if I started strangling a dog in front of you, would you stop me?
Yeah, I think that I have an obligation to prevent the death of living creatures.
Not death. No, I'm not going to kill it. I'm going to
Well,
sort of
even to prevent the
Deadpool
suffering
style
of
keep
an
it
animal.
alive just
Yeah.
so it can suffer more.
Yeah,
Will
sure.
you stop me from doing that?
Yeah,
Right, why?
because I believe that God wants us to protect the created order.
Okay, so
and to create goodness, light, and truth.
So
in
would
the
that be
world.
similar to, like, you know, me stepping on a plant or something? You're just like, hey, don't do that, man. It's the created
No,
order.
you could
Or do you
say
think
that-
it's because they're suffering?
I think it is probably because they're suffering, but I don't understand that suffering in terms of the way that humans suffer.
Okay, because you said that the reason why it's not so much of a problem for humans to enter the Vale of Tears and have to suffer is because they consent to do so before they're born. If animals don't do that, then I don't think that their suffering is justified on the same grounds.
Well, let me turn this around, because while I think that
Don't answer. Don't answer. Turn it around.
Yeah.
Don't respond
right.
to the obviously huge problem with your argumentation.
But after I did hear this and Alex saying, do plants feel pain when you step on it? I considered whether I should walk on the grass or not the next day.
I mean, that's a huge question. Like panpsychism, are plants conscious? Do they feel pain? Like, big questions there. But we can all agree that at least a significant portion of animals do feel pain. Like
Right.
that is not in question in this discussion.
For sure. And I think it's these kind of tactics are used really to move away from that, to avoid, as Jacob is acknowledging, the ones that we do for sure know. And so, and I've had this used against me a lot. So it's a familiar refrain, and it's just I don't know if red herring is the right word for this one. It's absurd.
And I don't know if my headphones died, so hopefully my audio is coming through clean. But the interesting thing about that for me just went out of my head. Ooh, somebody just mentioned my favorite philosopher. Sorry, distracted. Shall we do?
Hi, Dan.
Dan,
Hey, Dan.
Dan's in the house.
Dan in the house.
Sorry, go ahead. Were you going to
Yes,
read that out, Joe?
Nope.
Okay.
Shoot. It had to do with panpsychism, and now it's gone. Shall we just keep going?
Yeah.
Let's play a little bit more.
Some
Sorry.
objections there. My claim is that we have a better capacity to handle this than the creedal Christian model.
Sure. Okay.
Would you agree with my claim that we have a better model than creedal Christianity?
I don't know, because I don't know enough, because we've only been speaking for 10 minutes. There are probably things that it deals with better and things that it deals with worse.
Yeah.
For example, I've spoken a ton on my show.
In other words, Jacob, nothing you've shared here demonstrates that you have a better model. Nothing you've demonstrated proves your claim, Jacob.
Yeah.
Okay, it was there was a comment about consciousness. I don't mean to call anybody out about that, but like that only great apes and including humans experience consciousness. But there's actually great science that has been able to show that that's actually not true. Well, first of all, we don't really fundamentally understand what consciousness is. But if it is driven by our central nervous system, which it does appear to be, it appears that a much broader range of animals pass, for example, the Delible Mark test, where you put a mirror in front of an animal and you put a mark on them that they can wipe off. And then, the animals that are considered less conscious are going to be the ones who try to attack the animal in the mirror, where the ones that are considered more conscious are the ones who look at it and use it to wipe the mark off of themselves, because they can get the concept, that's me in that mirror. And it's like, how much? But even that, does that tell us what consciousness is? No, it doesn't.
Being self-aware is not the same thing as being conscious. That's a weird.
Right. And a lot of times it's just same animals. Like a cat can recognize that it's themselves in the mirror, but the first time that they come across that, they might not, and they'll arch up and they'll do all the things, and same for humans. Like babies don't get it,
Right.
Anyway.
There's a development process that humans go through where they don't have self-awareness, and then they do, as
and we would say
measured by these
babies
tests.
absolutely feel pain.
And we wouldn't say they don't feel pain, and we wouldn't say they're not conscious.
Right.
And
Right.
pain or no, Jacob might believe that if the right person puts a rock in a hat, you could interact with it at least.
Catalyst.
But I mean, it's an interesting conversation about what is consciousness and what is pain when it comes to it, because really, ultimately, it's not so much consciousness. I think personally, I think it's more theory of mind, because like Schopenhauer, that was my favorite philosopher who got mentioned in the comments and threw me off, said, basically, it's one thing for one animal to be eating another animal. It's a whole other thing for that animal to go, you are a being like me. I am, you are, and you are like me. Why would you do that to me? It's a whole nother level of suffering. And so it's like, and so even in that example, you're showing animals in pain and in tiered levels of pain based upon understanding meaning and purpose. And it's like, do animals experience anything even remote like that, Artie Shobes? And the answer is sure. Just watch them. You can watch them, and it's very clear they definitely do. They experience pain just as we do. We are not that darn special.
Let's hear a little bit more of Jacob.
Let's do it.
Show about the Gnostic cosmology, which I think does a lot to do away with problems like the problem of evil and the weird sort of seeming immateriality of Jesus in some passages and stuff. But there's a lot of problems with it too. There's a ton of problems, such as God's providence and the nature of why the demiurge is created. All of these ideas are oftentimes, I think, created because they better account for certain things over others. I don't think that's necessarily the case with Mormonism, of course. But yeah, I'm sure in some cases it does better, in some cases it does worse. In this case, I don't think it does anything more to explain the suffering of animals.
Your problem with the suffering of animals is that it's unjust.
No, it's not.
Then why do you? Then what?
Just trying to tell him what
It's suffering.
Again, it's just this justice that like something it either has to be either just only good or only bad, and the justice is retribution or punishment for bad. So again, it's just Jacob is not able to even get out of this mindset at all.
It's as if he's listened to nothing Alex has said up to this point. He told him it's not about injustice. He told him, I can imagine some suffering that does lead to good stuff. I'm talking about the gratuitous stuff. Justice only exists as a concept to correct injustice, right? If you created chemotherapy, chemotherapy is only good because cancer exists. You don't need to create the cancer in order to have the good of the chemotherapy. And in the same way, this gratuitous suffering is not about this injustice that Jacob keeps wanting it to be about for Alex.
Yeah.
If suffering ultimately is redeemed, let's say the animals on the other side, for all they suffer, they get.
Sorry,
the best.
I don't know if my comments can be heard over the audio. I don't necessarily want to stop it and make some long.
I can do that. I can just keep it. But I can just keep it playing until somebody says to stop. But no, that's exactly right. You're making an exact point.
Possible animal future that you could ever imagine. What? And the animals get there and they go, this is great, it was all worth it.
Yeah, then the question is
then it would be worth it. So it's the injustice of it.
The question is, why aren't they just given that without the suffering first? I can understand why that wouldn't happen with humans for whatever. Again, I want to clarify, I still have qualms with your idea, but let me just grant it for a moment. I can understand why you need to do that with humans before they get the nice reward at the end. But why the animals? Why cause them to suffer?
Human beings will suffer as well, unjustly. It's just the nature of an unjust world.
The suffering of animals, I think, is unexpected if a good God is overseeing.
But it's not a problem if ultimately they are compensated.
Well, I think it still is.
I'm going to mention this real quick. I'm going to stop it myself. So one thing that we didn't bring up in this, first of all, I'd hate to see the world that Gene, the resurrected world that Gene mentioned, where all the flies resurrect. First of all, that's been swarming my mind like a nightmare since you said those words. But I'd love to see the world of where Jacob's idea that all the animals are going to go, no, that was very well worth it. And I'm like, I can instantly see all the orca that are currently sinking luxury yachts in the Mediterranean and think, they're like, like, well, if we'd have known, if we'd have known it, how it had a meaning purpose, where these monkeys that can't really swim are all going to do much better in the afterlife and become gods, well, then we wouldn't have sunk all those yachts. But one of the interesting things about this that we didn't have time to go over is that very early in this conversation, Alex drops the word Rawlsian so quickly when he briefly talks about justice. And then all these conversations that nobody, if you don't know what Rawlsian justice is, you might not have heard it. It's one of many words that's being thrown around.
It's not from Lou Rawls, the great singer.
No, it was Lou Rawls, actually, now that I'm thinking about it. Yeah. No, it was John Rawls' theory of justice, which is so part and parcel to everything, all the claims that Alex is making here, which is this idea that if you create a world behind a veil of ignorance, if you're going to create a world where you distribute opportunities and resources equally among all deserving parties, you have to do it from behind a veil of ignorance. In other words, the person doing the selecting can't choose his own peace, can't choose the peace for his loved ones. He has to choose it. He has to be able to choose it for everybody and then take any random piece. Well, if you do that for animals as well as for human beings, that becomes very problematic. And in any situation, just like Alex is bringing up here, any situation where you have some conscious beings, some created beings who are made so that they get a different slice than everybody else, you're definitely not getting that Rawlsian justice. So I don't know where Jacob thinks he's going to create a standard of justice for him that's, when he doesn't even know what kind of justice Alex is talking about.
Thinking about Jacob's justification for human suffering, again, we talked about how humans at a snapshot in time are born into different circumstances, but think about looking backward and forward in time, where malaria is almost eradicated, is eradicated in many places, and so there was suffering that by Jacob's lights was necessary for people to reach their divine potential. And now let's say we do get to the point where we eradicate malaria from the planet. Nobody suffers from malaria ever again. Logically, the people born after the point of eradication of malaria would be handicapped. They would not be able to reach their divine potential because the equation changed. There was what Alex would call gratuitous suffering, unnecessary, that Alex is saying totally necessary. And so to me, that's illogical.
Yeah. And in a way, you would say that it would show that humans are stronger than God to have been able to subvert, God's own creation to cause suffering, for us to eradicate us. Is kind of Tower of Babel level of just circumventing God,
thwarting his plan, right?
Yeah,
like you needed that malaria, and now you aren't suffering from it.
Which kind of goes along to like any kind of suffering that we treat. When is it that we're, again, also maybe like by trying to alleviate someone else's suffering or our own, that we're disobeying God or circumventing God's plan for us? At what level do you draw the line there where it's okay to alleviate suffering versus not?
Yeah. And I mean, to their credit, I mean, the Mormons have tried to modernize theology. I really do. Yeah. I've pondered this with Stephen Pinecker having made this comment to me once, and I'm like, I'm going to have to think about that, Steve. And I'm like, yeah, I do kind of agree with it, that Joseph Smith tried to, using whatever Dartmouth source theology he had, to modernize Christianity. Because, I mean, you take a look at something like, Mother Teresa. Mother Teresa very famously was against abortion and against bodily autonomy. Birth control, etc. And when asked about it, she said, well, children are like flowers. you can't say that there are too many flowers. The world can't have too many flowers, which as a person with allergies, I'm like, it totes can. But but it's just, here's the interesting thing that, but then she runs these missions of charity in India, in Calcutta, and where people were suffering from ailments that were completely curable and not getting treatment. And when she would advertise it to people, she would say, well, what happens is we tell them while they are passing that if you'd like, we'll give you a blessing where you will pass into the next life, and God will receive you, and you will be blessed for eternity. And then they baptize them if they say yes, in this moment of complete duress that God doesn't apparently care about. The thing is that in Christian theology, depending on which Christian theology you follow, but most Christian theology, I would say, that does seem to make sense, that the earlier you would want more people to come into this world of suffering, and you would want them to leave as soon as possible so that they would add to God's glory and into his kingdom and praise him continually forever and ever. And it's like, this is a problem. For me, I look at it and say, any Christian who had that confronted with them would have to say that is a problem that they don't seem to figure out very well.
Yeah. Going back to Mother Teresa, she's one of the few, like those people that you initially like, and it seems like such a caregiver. But then when you find out who she was, and like you said, she allowed a lot of suffering to happen that could have been abated. Like she did not believe in giving, I guess, vaccines or even just pain relief. These things would be donated and would be thrown away. So that's very, very sad to me. But yeah, she saw the glory of God in suffering. So she saw in other people's suffering, which is always super convenient because it's always, again, going back to the babies with cancer thing, it's always easier to find glory, God's glory in other people's suffering rather than your own. And then all of a sudden things kind of change a little bit. But yeah, that's just I guess an interesting flip where Christians allow, like, because of this ideology, will allow and perpetuate a lot of suffering because, again, I guess, I don't know, it just teaches us to have a really high tolerance for it, or just to not care about suffering as much. And I think Jacob is showing that here as well, just a kind of a general flippance toward it, that it makes sense that not only do Christians in general allow a lot of suffering, but also will actively cause more of it when it could be diminished at least.
And so I think Jacob thinks that he made some good points or something, and like he's asking Alex at the end, like, would you say that my Mormon model, what I've been able to communicate here, isn't that better than everybody else's model? And I don't think Alex is persuaded. It strikes me as the height of arrogance to think that all these other people with Christian philosophers coming up with their own just so stories and their own explanations, that this particular flavor that Jacob is presenting blows the others out of the water. Like, to me, they're on a par. Like, okay, this is how I explain it. This is how I explain it. This,
and Alex, will you be baptized? You agree with me? I was waiting for that.
Yeah. I'll give it to Jacob because I do still feel, I think now on the other side of things, I do still feel a sense of superiority about Mormonism over the majority of evangelical beliefs.
Oh, really?
To be perfectly honest, I do.
Really?
Not much, not just a touch, but it is enough to still be there. So I'll give Jacob this, but that's not bringing me back to church anytime soon.
Yeah.
I still, like, that's not a belief that I lost, that there's some superiority and at least some, like, Mormon theological teachings compared to what I perceive as big gaps, again, because those were also taught to me as part of Mormonism, in the evangelical theology that I do still agree with. So, so I'll give that to Jacob. I'll give him his point. We've got the best one, but that's not enough to actually bring me back to belief or bring me back to church. And it's not going to be something to bring Alex over. And I think, I don't know, that was the most kind of almost adorable thing about this whole transaction, is like Jacob feeling so excited. It seemed almost childlike, of thinking like, that he made an inroads, with somebody again, just not being able to understand that like he's a child talking to an adult that can understand so much more about these kinds of things, so I don't know, it just made me think of like when my nephew tells me something that I already know, but it, says it in a really matter-of-fact way, as if I never considered it as an adult, or he learned something new, like, how to hop on one leg. Like, it's just like, hey, that's really great. That, good job. You are doing so good. Yeah. That's kind of how I see this transaction. It's cute, and I'm happy for Jacob that he feels like he really made some inroads there. Like, good for him.
Yeah.
Get to inflict suffering and then compensate people and think that that's okay. Have you heard of the Bullingdon Club? It's a club.
No, if I have to inflict suffering on here,
wait a second. Let me give you this example. Let me give you this example. There's an infamous club, a private members club at Oxford University called the Bullingdon Club. They're a bunch of like Etonites, posh kids who used to go around. They'd go to restaurants. They were incredibly rich. They would host a dinner and then they would trash the place. They'd flip over tables. They'd smash things. They'd cover the walls and everything. It was absolutely devastating, just horrible behavior. And then when the owner came up and said, "What the hell have you done?" They just paid them off. They said, "Hey, have a bunch of money." And not only that, they paid them way more than the repairs are worth. So they could get away with it because if anything, they've done those people a favor. No, it's still terrible, awful behavior, because even if you've compensated someone for it, if you've caused them for suffering, which by the way still hasn't been explained why that suffering exists,
30 seconds.
It doesn't seem like it's worth it.
Let me do this.
Or if it's not worth it, it doesn't seem like it's justifiable.
It can be worth it though. For instance, a dog that's getting a shot has no idea what's going on. He's just thinking, this hurts and is so terrible. And the thing is if it ultimately saves its life, it's worth it.
Yeah, but imagine if you had
can we stop? Do you see what happened there? So Alex has constantly been talking about unnecessary suffering, gratuitous suffering. And so he provides yet another example to try to drive this home to Jacob. And he says, let me do this. And then he provides an example of where suffering, it has a purpose. He's just not addressing the challenge to his claim. It's the gratuitous suffering, Jacob.
Yeah.
And this is classic Jacob. It's don't respond to what your interlocutor is saying.
I'd be surprised if he heard it.
It doesn't land. It doesn't land. Yeah.
I gotta say, Jason Brown, I mean, I thought that Dan Vogel's Woody Allen comment, stolen Woody Allen comment, was the best, but rich kids are like God. I need that needle point on a pillow. I mean, right there. That's beautiful. That's beautiful.
And I think he asks, why does Jacob always go to animal awareness? I think that's a lot of Alex, actually. And I think part of the reason is to really show, again, the gratuitous suffering, because we see other animals as maybe not quite having as much agency as we do and as much ability to think and manipulate. And so it's just, I think it's a way to try to simplify the examples and simplify the equation by taking it to animals who are just as much affected by not just suffering that's a natural result of just living in a world that we do, where animals have to eat each other and there's, parasites and rain and starvation, just normal things that don't have to be inflicted. But then you do also have deliberate, gratuitous suffering inflicted, by humans, usually on animals, just for the sake of causing them pain, for no reason. I think that's why it goes to animals, is to try to really simplify this question.
Suffering that's there, everything can be redeemed.
I understand what you're saying.
In your view, is life even worth it? Because if life is mostly suffering, even for the animals, then isn't the logical conclusion to end this project altogether?
That's a separate question. But if you had the opportunity to not have that dog need the shot, and you gave them the shot anyway, you created the need for the shot, and then gave them the shot and caused them to suffer.
But in
you didn't need to
LDS
give them the need in the first place.
God does not create the conditions that are where the shot is necessary. You're correct, and you're correct on creedal Christianity. It does, and that's the biggest flaw with it. By the way, I want to give you. That's just. Well, hey, thanks, Alex. It's been great to meet, man.
Likewise. Yes.
The idea that Mormonism has some kind of consistent lock on, or like logically consistent claims there, is absurd. I can show you scriptures and general conference talks that very clearly teach divine command theory. God is the lawgiver. He can give a law and he can take it away, right? There are 10 temporary commandments. He's absolutely the source of the law. He decides what's right and wrong. But then when it's inconvenient, when you point out that divine command theory is very flawed and indefensible, then Jacob switches over to it's the fabric of the universe. It couldn't be any other way. It's not God doing it. God's just along for the ride, taking advantage of these laws that are independent of him. And
Right.
I want to like adjust the compensation idea too, because I don't. I'm just realizing now, I don't think there's actually any merit in that argument at all, because when I'm considering any, especially if we're looking at law, like when people get compensation for, medical malpractice or, a car accident from a negligent driver, every person that I know who has been awarded any kind of compensation for things that have happened to them would all choose to forego that compensation to not have had that thing happen to them in the first place. Yeah. Like by and large, like, and when you look at like sexual assault victims, like sometimes people look at like, wow, like these people got like $1 million payout, like they're set for life, but they were harmed for life also. And the money, like it's something, it's better than nothing, but no amount of money or opportunity or anything makes up for the previous suffering. And I think what's even worse about this idea of like ultimate compensation that will make it okay is that it happens after we're dead, when we cannot verify it. And I would say I'm certain that it's not there. But even if it was, it's not fair to expect people to just accept suffering, especially at the hands of others, when there does not seem to be a good reason for it, that we're just supposed to accept it and trust that on the other side of things, in a way that we can't ever verify or even pass on to other people, that it does get verified, that we are compensated truly in a way to fully be made whole. It's just, I think, quite devious and insidious to put that compensation, that being made whole, which I don't think there is an equivalent for or any basis to think that actually does or can happen. But again, we're putting it in heaven. We're putting it after the fact, which again, you have to earn to be there in the first place. So if you go through all this suffering in life and then you do not make it to heaven for whatever reason, then you still aren't compensated for the gratuitous suffering that you experience. So yeah, so I don't think it's actually a compelling argument at all, this idea of compensation.
And if Jacob's God is not the one who's handing out the rewards, if this is like the fabric of the universe, what do I need Jacob's God for? Mm-hmm. Right? I can learn from my mistakes, and if I'm like harnessing those laws in ways that move me towards more power and happiness and whatever, if Jacob's God's not the one who's doing the punishing, or the one, like the language he used was, he's not the one creating the conditions for the gratuitous suffering.
Yeah.
He's like invoking his God and then removing his God from the equation as needed to make.
So to Dan's point, this theology stuff is like trying to get out of a hole you dug yourself. I'll say that theology is like buried treasure, and you have to do
Very
things
slippery.
exactly the right way, or else it'll slip further and further away from you.
Yeah. Would you guys agree with Jacob even that God is not the one acting like behind, or he's not creating the circumstances?
Yeah, how could he not create the circumstances?
Yeah.
I've often said if you can find a God that a theologian would find defensible to say exists, it would insult every believer in God that exists in the world, because every one of them believes that God intended for this suffering particularly to happen to me. And the only God that theologians are going to find ultimately defensible is going to be a deistic God who keeps hands off, isn't responsible for this, isn't responsible for that. And then the theist who's sitting there going, I pray to this God, could you not?
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
I just thought that didn't really comport with my being raised in the church, was that God's not responsible for that stuff, he didn't create those circumstances. I don't know what he's getting at here. That really flew in my face.
That's pretty interesting. So I'll have to say that Sam has to go pretty soon. I have a dinner appointment that people are on their way to pick us up, but let's go through. Let's let Sam say his closing arguments, and then we'll go from there and see what happens.
Oh, my closing arguments. Well, just flowing from what we were just talking about, I think that what you hear over the pulpit's inconsistent in this regard. Like you definitely get divine command theory taught, and then you also get the idea that God just he abides by eternal law, right? We hear both of these things, and you just whip out whichever version is convenient for the point you're trying to make. This is what all theologies do, right? So I think that Jacob thinks that he's got some super consistent, super philosophically rigorous theology, and it's just not. It's not. Yeah, that's my final thought.
It's not. They're not equal intellectually, but he thinks that he is.
His flavor of Mormonism is not what gets taught over the pulpit, and it's not any better than any other creedal Christianity theology. That's my claim.
Yeah.
You're muted, Gene. Okay.
I'm just chatting to people in my room, the spirits that are in my room, so that we can get through. So my overall thought is that it was thanks to Jubilee for doing this, right? They did another Jubilee thing, was that like 7 or 8 months ago, where John DeLynn got to express his opinions about things. And I recommend people go back to that as well. And we know that we can go forward, that people be on both sides of these arguments for thousands of years, probably. But hopefully the internet age and AI will finally something slap people into sensible positions, we'll say.
You can hope. I think Joe had more clips to go over. I don't know, Gene, if you're all right with it, if you guys have to go, if Joe and I keep going for the extra clips, is that all right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll bounce when my ride gets here, and then you guys can run the show from there.
All right. And then
thanks
Joe,
everybody for watching.
Yes, thank you. And then Joe, do you want to get that pulled up on your side of things?
Sure, I could do that. Let's see here.
Dan Vogel has got a good comment that Joseph Smith didn't have a consistent theology. And I don't think I don't think it's possible for anyone to. I mean, even if we tried, I know that as I was growing, especially as I was becoming an adult and learning more about the world, I was adjusting my own theology, but in my mind, I was thinking that I was adjusting towards more in line with what has always been true and what the theology always was. I wasn't able to recognize that I was really changing what it was, for me in my own mind. So I was becoming like more progressive and more kind towards other people that I had been previously taught to look down on. And again, I didn't see it as me changing, or as not. I did see it as me changing, not as the gospel changing. I just thought I'm understanding the gospel better, and I'm becoming more Christ-like as I'm becoming more progressive and more liberal. And then when I looked back, at people who were where I used to be and how I had been taught, I would think of them as not having arrived here with this understanding, this truer understanding. So yeah, everyone, it's not possible, I think, to really keep a consistent theology our whole lives as human beings, period.
I've got one. Deism. I mean, the simpler the theology, the easier it is to be consistent. And so if you just
I guess that's true. I've never met somebody that's been a deist their whole life, but it's plausible,
If you just say there was an uncaused cause and the universe came into existence, and then you leave it at that, there's your consistent.
I mean, even that you need faith to get there. But
I totally agree.
Minefields.
That's absolutely a just so story, but it's a consistent story, I think. I mean,
I agree.
I don't see glaring logical inconsistencies just making that claim. Maybe it's unfounded, but self-consistent.
Cool.
All right. Do we have those clips, Joe? Or are we?
I have the video that we were going to go over with from Jacob's channel.
Okay.
Should we do that?
Yeah.
I don't have clips. I just have the whole video. So, but
okay.
But there's some good nuggets in there. Let's see here.
See, this one looks like the other one. Or are you pulling both of them up?
No, it should be the new one.
Oh, this one? Oh, there we go.
So I recently was on the show Jubilee as part of a panel of about 25 Christians.
So yeah, that's the one.
Okay.
Let's see here. But the juicy bits on this one is him talking in between. Let's see here. He gets into talking about setting up that final piece. Hopefully we don't get flagged for playing his videos. Well, we're playing Jubilee's video, playing it. His playing Jubilee's video.
Probably a later edition. It wasn't in the original version.
Okay, regardless, is Jesus' birth portrayed as a normal human birth?
No, not at all.
In all of the synoptics. So if he's not
Well, I thought that was going to play him talking about. Here we go.
portray Jesus saying and doing things that no mortal man would do or say. But to be fair, that does not mean everything in the Gospels must be perfectly reliable, and he points that out.
But within the Gospels, there are more and less historically reliable points. So as I've already said, there are seemingly sources. So for example, when Jesus says something in Aramaic on the cross, when he says, Eli, Eli.
Did Jesus...
Okay, pause. Sorry, you've been voted out by the majority. Please return to your seat.
Cheers, good fun. Nice to meet you.
Great to meet you. So overall, I enjoyed the exchange, and all the credit in the world to Alex. Being grilled by multiple people and having to do all of this off the top of your head is super challenging, and he did a great job. So after a few more people had their turn, something happened that I did not expect.
This chap over here just seems also very knowledgeable, very enthusiastic and philosophically minded as well. Why don't we bring you back?
Out of everyone he spoke with, Alex chose me as the person he wanted to debate. And now I would have to make a claim and defend it from Alex. Now keep in mind that I was surrounded by 25 people who probably don't even think that I'm Christian. But I also knew that this was likely the only chance in my life that I would ever have to make a claim about the restored gospel in front of 10 million people online. So I took my shot. So, my claim, which might bother some people in this circle, and this is why I thought maybe we could find a...
But okay, so that was the thing I had mentioned earlier about how he does this. This is like a prepared soundbite for him. He did the same thing on Ward Radio. I knew this was my one chance, my one opportunity to make a case for the gospel, which is why this is so interesting to me about Alex's intentions versus that of 25 Christians, right? It's not Alex pushing atheism. First of all, atheism is the easiest thing to defend in the world or advocate for because there's nothing to it, like literally nothing to it. But he's sitting there having an interesting conversation and listening to all these different people's points of view on what he's saying. And then if he feels like he's not going down a direction he likes, he just changes position and says, okay, well, that's interesting. Let's talk about this aspect over here. And he can just keep going because he knows he knows all the various aspects of the theology that they're talking about. Whereas Jacob's there to sell Mormonism, right?
It's his missionary moment.
Right. Now, to be fair, every one of those people did that. Nobody in that room didn't do what Jacob did, in my opinion. But most of them were there to push the theory they got from one class, they had in college, or one book that they read from so-and-so, or just even some of them, just how they feel when they read the Bible. There was a couple of people in there who just like, I read the Bible, I don't feel that way. And it's like, well, okay, that is faith. I mean, that is what they're there to do. But what Alex was there to do was have a conversation with 25 different people who very clearly none of them were as well read as he was on the subject. So that would be my only complaint me personally about Jubilee, which is awesome and can have me on anytime they want, is that, if Jacob could go up against one person who had even just read as much as he had read, it'd be much more worthwhile to me. But I found this to be amusing. I liked it. I liked what Alex did there, and his follow-up. I wish we had time to go over this, but I also have to go here in a minute. But his follow-up basically about how, Jacob is, that Alex is vindicating what happened with the testimony of the witnesses of the Book of Mormon.
Yeah.
I mean, he very clearly isn't getting what Alex is trying to say, which is what we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
So.
I got to
Sam,
run now.
you got to go.
I think, yeah. Hey, thanks for
It's
having
great
me.
to meet you, man.
Thanks for the conversation. Nice to meet you. Good talking to you.
Good talking with you, Sam.
We will maybe do this again.
I hope so. Yeah. Thanks for joining.
Take care. Bye. How do I?
Like that?
All right. So are you, did you have another clip then you wanted to play?
Yes, but I'm afraid we're running out of time because
That's right. Okay. That's right. We can go ahead and end it here. Do all the things, everyone. Like and subscribe. This has been platformed on 3 different channels. I know it's been on mine, but also check it out. Like and subscribe on Church of Korhor and also Latter Daily Digest. And then thanks for the support. I know all of our channels at some point have been maybe cut but then brought back. We've been at the mercy of the YouTube gods. So I guess maybe that's the only God for us to really answer to and to try to figure out. But it does seem like we're still going, and thanks to those who stuck it out with us. Go ahead, Joe. Any closing statements from you?
I just want to say how grateful I am for Maven for being here. It's not always easy for us to organize these, and Maven, I love having your take on these things. So I really do want to tell you my appreciation that you made time for this, and it's been a good time.
I appreciate it. I've had a good time as well, and hopefully the audience has too. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.